passes down to the descending limb, the loop of Henle, and then come to the ascending limb, right? And ultimately come to the secondary tubule and collecting ducts. Ladies and gentlemen, collecting ducts they join calyces. They terminate in calyces. Calyces are dilated sacs, and minor calyces they end in the minor calyces. And 3 or 4, I mean, say there are nearly 8 to 7 to 10 minor calyces. They join together to form major calyces. And major calyces they join together to form a huge calyx that is known as renal pelvis. So urine ultimately comes to the renal pelvis. That point, from the renal pelvis, that is a large calyx, that is a large cell. Through, I mean, say from the renal pelvis, we find east pelvis. There are 2 kidneys, but 2 pelvis, east pelvis. They or I will say they are continuing as ureter. There are 2 ureter, right and left ureter, right? And these ureters they pass gradually downwards, and ultimately they end in the urinary bladder. Now, ladies and gentlemen, coming to that point, you will find that the inner diameter of the ureter is quite large in the beginning, near the calyces. That is nearly, say, 5 to 10 millimeter, quite a large one. Gradually narrows down, and by the time it reaches to the urinary bladder, it becomes only 1 millimeter. The diameter decreases as the ureter they pass down. Another important thing about the ureter is that they are made up of smooth muscles, which are circular as well as longitudinal, and they exhibit a property of peristalsis. That is, you have seen it in case of GIT. Peristalsis is a wave of constriction that it starts and going further down, probably downwards. So, as soon as the urine is collected in the renal pelvis, the distension of the renal pelvis initiates the peristaltic movement in the ureter, and this is the peristaltic. They are responsible to bring the urine into the urinary bladder, right? So once it, I may say there are nearly 3 to 5 peristalses every minute. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the muscles in the ureter they are supplied mainly by parasympathetic fiber. They are motor. So parasympathetic stimulation leads to increase in the peristalsis. Sympathetic, they don't play any major role here. Right? So they are lined by, I mean they are made up of smooth muscles, right? Outer coat is also fibrous coat, is a protective coat. And then you come to the innermost coat is the epithelium, which are known as the transitional epithelium. That is, the cells in the transitional epithelium, they are having a very tight junction. So there is no absorption in the urine from when it is passing down. So there is no alteration in the urine when they are passing down. It is coming to the urinary bladder. And then, gentlemen, urinary bladder is a bag of smooth muscles. They are, you may call it as a inner is a longitudinal and circular and outer longitudinal. They are the muscles. Usually we see it under the microscope in the slide. But functionally they are a spiral one. Something like that is when they are contracting, the force is directed towards the opening, that is the opening of the bladder. So bladder muscles are arranged in a spiral way, and they are arranged in 3 different directions, right? And these muscles, the bladder muscles are special muscles. They are doing a special name. They are known as the detrusor muscles. Detrusor, detrusor muscles. That means they are push down muscles. something like they are pushing down the urine in the bladder out of the bladder. That is, we will see what is their function. The inner part of the bladder is lined by transitional epithelium. Again, the epithelium which can stretch as the bladder stretches and can come back to the original shape when bladder relaxes. Now, if there is a point which is known as the trigone of the bladder. Trigone is a triangle area in the base of the bladder that has got 3 points. 2 points are made by 2 ureters, and third point is the internal opening of the bladder, which passes. I mean, say, which continues as internal urethra. That is the prostatic urethra, the internal urethra. That is the trigone, and trigone is supposed to be the most sensitive part of the bladder. There is another important thing is in the bladder is that there is, I mean, say, urine is coming from the kidney and ending in the bladder. Passes posteriorly from the posterior side of the bladder, and they pass spirally down the muscles of the bladder. So there is no valve. The functional valve is that whenever the bladder contracts or whenever the urine is collected in the bladder, right, it compresses the wall and it prevents the reflex flow of the urine. This is the story of the bladder. Bladder is supplied by sympathetic and parasympathetic nerve, right? And at the same time, sympathetic is said to be play. They say sometimes we read it in the books that they call the relaxation of the bladder, and others say that they don't play any role in the bladder. But the internal sphincter of the bladder is a tonic sphincter, tonically contracted, and this is under the control of sympathetic. We will take a little bit more about that one. And then the detrusor muscles are supplied by afferent as well as efferent fibers. Both are from the pelvic nerves. They are parasympathetic fibers. And they are afferent fiber is responsible to carry the sensation to the sacral region, and efferent fiber they bring the motor part from the sacral region. So pelvic nerve that is carrying the fibers from the parasympathetic fibers. The parasympathetic fiber arises from sacral, second, third, and fourth, right? And they are acting as sensory as well as motor. We will see in the bladder muscles there are stretch receptors. So whenever the bladder is stretching, it gets it. Now again, I am coming back to the internal sphincter. Internal sphincter keeps in a tone. It is a tonic closure. So the bladder is always kept closed. Prevent the dribbling of the urine. And this is supplied by sympathetic. So sympathetic is the controller of internal sphincter. Another important point about this internal sphincter is that this is responsible for, in case of males, this is responsible for the reflux of the semen in the bladder at the time of ejaculation. Right? At the time of ejaculation, when the semen is ejaculated in the urethra, it can go back to the bladder. It is the internal sphincter which prevents the reflux. It is not reflex. Reflux, F-L-U-X. Reflex of the, I mean say, the return of the semen in the urinary bladder. So it prevents the entry of the semen in the urinary bladder. This is the internal sphincter. Outer court of the bladder is made up of fibrous tissues. So ladies and gentlemen, the next one is the urethra. Is an epithelial lined tube that discharges urine from the body. In the male, it also discharges semen at the time of ejaculation. So urethra in the males has got two functions: passing of urine and ejaculation of the semen, discharge of the semen. In case of female, it is only for the purpose of evacuating urine. In female, the urethra is only 3 to 4 centimeters long. But in case of male, it is 18 to 20 centimeters. It is a very long urethra, right? In case of female, urethra is 3 to 4 meter, 3 to 4 centimeter, and it is fixed to the anterior wall of the vagina, right? So it lies between the clitoris and vaginal opening. Between the vagina and clitoris. In case of male, urethra has got 3 parts, 18 to 20 centimeter long, 3 parts: prostatic urethra, membranous urethra, and spongy urethra. That is, now here you see it here. This is the bladder. Here you will find trigone, right? What I was talking to you, 2 ureters and the internal opening. And this is the internal sphincter, which prevents, prevents a normal passing of the urine, and at the same time, it prevents the reflux of the semen at the time of ejaculation. Here is the membranous part of the urethra. Right? See, there is no prostate here. In case of male, there will be a prostate here. In case of female, there will be only membranous part. And this is the external sphincter. Try to remember, external sphincter is under our voluntary control. Here is the case of males. Again, this is the trigone. This is the internal sphincter. This is the prostate, which was not there in case of females. Here you don't find prostate, but here you find prostate in case of male urethra. This is the prostate, right? And then you see some openings here. That is in the prostatic part. There are at least 2 openings. One is for prostatic fluid, right? Prostate secretes a fluid which comes over here at the time of ejaculation. And another opening is opening for seminiferous tubule. Opening for that is in the urogenital part. Opening for seminiferous tubules and vas deferens, that is responsible for the ejection of the sperms here. So there are 2 openings in the prostatic part of the urethra. This is the external sphincter, which is under the control of the will, that is voluntary control. And then you find bulbourethral glands here. There are bulbourethral glands, right? These glands, they secrete mucus and alkaline fluids. Alkaline fluid is primarily responsible to change the pH of the semen, so sperm can survive well in the alkaline fluid. And at the same time, it secretes some mucus as well. In the spongy part of the urethra, you will find Leiter's gland. They secrete mucus, which is essential at the time of excitation, at the time of sexual act. Now here is the another one. We have seen that in case of males, urethra has got 3 parts. We have seen the neck portion of the bladder. We are talking about urethra. I was talking before. Neck portion of the bladder forms internal sphincter. We have talked about, supplied by sympathetic nerve. It is kept in the tonic contraction, and it prevents the dribbling of the bladder. It prevents the passing of the urine without desire, without occasion. Right? It controls the urinary detention in the bladder. Another thing is, in case of males, it is responsible to prevent the reflux of the semen ejaculation. Now, prostatic part of the urethra has got openings for prostatic fluid, as we talked about. It has got opening for seminal vesicles and vas deferens to delivery of the semen. Right? Bulbourethral glands, open in the spongy urethra, deliver alkaline fluid and mucus at the time of sexual arousal and excitement. Ladies and gentlemen, spongy urethra contains a Leiter's gland. Right? Leiter's gland secretes mucus during the sexual arousal for the lubrication of penis. That is the. Now here is the again. We are talking about this is the trigone, internal sphincter. This is the membranous urethra. In case of female, there is no prostate here, and this is the external urethral sphincter, which is under the control supplied by the voluntary nerve, by the pudendal nerve. Coming to the prostatic urethra is also known as the posterior urethra in case of females, and it contains membranous urethra, a very short portion, and continued as a spongy. Membranous urethra passes through the pelvic floor, which contains external sphincter, circular muscles, provided voluntary control of the urination. Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to a little bit important, difficult part. How is the passing of the urine occurs? Micturation means act of passing urine out of body. Right? Micturation is an autonomic spinal reflex, but can be manipulated by voluntary and involuntary muscles. So whenever, say you will find this. This reflex can be inhibited by an area in the midbrain. That is, reflex is in the spinal reflex in the 234, S234, but at the same time, it has been controlled by the higher centers, that is in the midbrain. It has an area which can inhibit it, and it can be facilitated by a center in the pons. So pons facilitates the passing of urine, whereas the midbrain inhibits the passing of the urine. Say, many centers in the cerebral cortex, again, cerebral cortex, that is under your willful control, inhibit the sacral somatic neuron to exercise voluntary control over urination. That is, if you develop an urge to pass urine, but the situation is not suitable to you, then you can suppress it, you can inhibit it, and that is done by the higher centers, the cerebral centers, the cortical centers. Right? Normal inhibition is done by the midbrain centers and facilitated by the pontine center. That is the next one is nerve supply to the urinary bladder. Please try to remember this one. This is quite an important one. Sympathetic supply arises from L1 and L2, lumbar 1 and lumbar 2. Some books write it is lumbar 3 as well. Spinal segment, and its stimulation causes relaxation of the bladder muscles. This is again a controversial part. Right? It may cause, I do not know. Some books write that there is a relaxation, others say no relaxation. Right? But the thing is that it causes a contraction of internal sphincter. That is a shock. But try to remember, it supplies to the bladder muscles. Sympathetic supply to the bladder muscles, whether it's called, I do not know. But certainly it causes a tonic contraction of the internal sphincter. Try to remember this one again. Now, sympathetic system maintains the tone of the internal sphincter, always maintain its tone. So the leaking of the urine is prevented. SNS stimulation shortly prevents the reflux. Try to remember, this is not reflex. Reflux, that is the reflex of the semen into the urinary bladder, is under the control of, prevention is under the control of system. Ladies and gentlemen, parasympathetic system arises from 2, 3, 4 of the sacral segment. They pass to the bladder through the pelvic nerve, and they are sensory as well as motor. That is, we are coming to an important point. That is, contraction of the detrusor muscles. Parasympathetic system causes contraction of the detrusor muscles and relaxation of the internal sphincter. So this supplies to the detrusor muscle as well as internal sphincter. Sympathetic causes constriction of the internal sphincter. This causes relaxation of the internal sphincter. You may call it as sympathetic causes a slight relaxation of the detrusor muscles. It causes a strong PNS. Parasympathetic causes a strong contraction of the detrusor muscles. Ladies and gentlemen, again try to remember, that is, in the spinal segment, the lateral horn cells, they are responsible for autonomic system, whereas the anterior are responsible for motor system. Say voluntary motor system. Then segment 234 segment, this is a somatic efferent. That is, this is responsible that controls the contraction and relaxation of the external sphincter. That is, Whenever the situation is favorable, you can relax the external sphincter and pass urine. When the situation is not favorable, you can keep it contracted. That is under the pudendal nerve control. Coming to the next one, ladies and gentlemen, filling of the bladder. So when the urine is discharged out, when you pass urine, right, bladder becomes empty. There is no urine at that time, no pressure in this one. That is at the end of the discharge of the urine from the bladder. There is no pressure in the bladder. Now try to remember, urine is continuously formed all the times. Urine is formed, right? And that urine is transported to the urinary bladder. How much urine is produced by continuously? 1 ml every minute. They normally say 60 ml every hour, like that. And that is by peristalsis continuously transported. Initially, there is no rise in the intravesical pressure due to the plasticity of the detrusor muscles. Coming to the plasticity, what is this plasticity? This is the plasticity. Plasticity is the quality. That is, whenever there is an increase in the pressure, right, it expands. Result is the pressure decreases back. So because the urinary bladder has got plasticity, so initially when the urine is collected, there is no rise in the pressure. As the urine is collected, pressure increases, plasticity will cause further back. So up to the level of say nearly 150 mil, and up to the level of 150 mil, there is not much pressure, but at 150, you develop a desire to pass urine. Develop a first desire to void urine is felt. A marked sense of the fullness occurs. Now say, you are sitting in the class, you have collected say 150 ml of this bladder, I mean urine in the bladder, you develop a desire, but you cannot go. So you suppress it, right? And the pressure, again by the plasticity, pressure decreases again. But when it reaches to the level of 400 ml, the intense desire to pass urine develops, right? Intense desire develops, but it is still not painful. Filling of the 200 and 400 ml of the urine increases intravesical pressure. That is, after 200, a little bit pressure, 200 ml collection, a little bit pressure rises. Up to 400, it rises quite high, and it becomes safe. I mean, when the pressure is increased, what happens to the urinary, what happens to the bladder muscles? There are stress receptors. These stress receptors are stressed whenever there is an increase in the pressure of the bladder. These stress receptors are sensitive receptors. They send impulses. They send sensory impulses to the sacral centers, sacral spinal centers, 234, S234, and from there the return comes, efferent comes through the parasympathetic to cause the contraction of the bladder. So these are these stress receptors which are important ones. Stress receptors are responsible to pass the information that the bladder is full to the sacral segment, right? Sacral segment 234. From there, the impulses, the fibers, or the impulses go to the midbrain and bones. That is, they are responsible. Midbrain is responsible to cause inhibition, whereas the bone center is responsible for the facilitation. Sensory impulses that activates the micturation reflex. Now, micturation reflex is there. This is going on. Motor impulses comes back to cause contraction of the detrusor muscles and relaxation of the internal sphincter when the collection is 400 mil. When the period is over, that is 1 hour lecture is over. You are free to go out and there you attend the toilet. External sphincter is voluntarily relaxed at the time of discharge of the urine to the exterior, and that is responsible for emptying of the bladder, right? That is responsible for emptying of the bladder. Now, this is how the bladder is full, bladder is filled with, and bladder is empty. Now, ladies and gentlemen, just try to remember the voluntary control is exercised by the higher centers, by the cerebral cortex as well. Cerebral cortex is always inhibited, always try. And inhibition, when it is removed, the relaxation appears and the urine is passed out. Sometimes the problem develops as a result of damage to the spinal cord, as a result of damage or different system. So there are another conditions. Number one is continence and incontinence. Try to understand these two words. Continence means ability to hold urine, right? Continence means ability of the person to hold urine. Incontinence means you don't have a control on that one. It means a lack of ventral control over micturation. That is, the urinary incontinence means lack of urinary control over micturation. In young children, up to the age of 2-3 years of age, they are in a habitual bad batting. Reason being is that their external sphincter is not controlled up to that level. External sphincter requires the control over the urinary bladder. That is the voluntary control. That is, the nerves are they are not myelinated to that level. So 2-3 years this goes on. After 3 years, the child becomes aware of when the urine bladder is full, and therefore they will ask their mother or father to take them to the toilet. Stress incontinence. This stress incontinence, sometimes it is a normal phenomenon. Stress incontinence happens whenever you are coughing, whenever you are sneezing, or whenever you are lifting a heavy weight. This is a stressful condition, and the bladder can cause incontinence. Overflow incontinence. Ladies and gentlemen, just try to remember one thing. Spinal shock. Sometimes what happens? There is a damage to the spinal cord, right? There is a damage to the spinal cord above the sacral region. And at that time, it happens the spinal shock as a result of, the person goes in a state of spinal shock, doesn't recover for quite a long time. But when it recovers, something happens. What is that? In the spinal shock, the micturation reflex is intact. That is the damage to the spinal cord is above the sacral region. So micturation reflex from the bladder to the S234 and back. It is intact, but voluntary control is lost because the upper control is lost. From an over distended bladder, urine dribbles out periodically. In this case, there is a reflex is there, but not voluntary control. Voluntary control is lost. So as a result of that reflex, small amount of the urine comes out. What we call the dribbling of the urine, right? So over distended bladder, whenever there is an over distension, it may cause a little bit discharge of the urine from an over distended bladder, urine dribbles periodically. When the shock is over, reflex returns. Now see, try to remember this one. When the spinal shock is over, reflex returns back. Micturation reflex. The reflex from the bladder sensory to the spinal center, micturation center, and back to the bladder. This is recovers, but not voluntary control. Voluntary control is already lost. And then come to the last part of this one is clinical condition of the urinary bladder. Atonic bladder. Atonic bladder happens whenever there is an afferent pathway is damaged. Afferent pathway. By this time, you might be from anatomy, you might be remembering That is all the efferent pathway, all the sensory fibers, they are coming to the posterior horn cells. From the posterior horn cells, some of them they go to the posterior columns, and some of them they cross, and some of them they come to the lateral horn cells or anterior horn cells. Now this is the what we call the apparent pathway. This apparent pathway is damaged in the disease known as tabes dorsalis. Tabes dorsalis leads to damage in the apparent pathway, and as a result of that, reflex contraction of the bladder is abolished because there is apparent pathway is lost. No micturation reflex, bladder is overfilled, distended, thin-walled, and dribbling. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story I wanted to tell you. Thank you very much. May God bless you all. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to send this email of all the slides to you. And if there is any difficulty, we will try to talk whenever you are coming, and we will meet you in LMC. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
बच्चों आज ही पढ़ना है इसको.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Difficulty anywhere. I have anyhow. Thank you very much. God bless you.